The scripture lesson for this morning comes from the Gospel according to St. Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. On that day, when the evening had come, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." So leaving the crowd behind, they took Jesus with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. Now a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. So they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care that we are perishing?" So Jesus woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. Jesus said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And the disciples were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who is this that even the wind and the seas obey him?" Here ends the lesson. May God transform understanding into action. Amen. I'm going to do something a little different this morning. I hope you don't mind. Can everyone see and hear me okay? Good. Wonderful. Good. So we're familiar with this. So I know that I can be animated in the mornings. Usually when I get a couple cups of coffee in me, it's hard to get me to slow down. Last week I overheated a little bit, and so I wanted to kind of slow down. But I also wanted to set a different tone for this morning because I feel like we have a lot to talk about as a congregation. And rather than being up there, I realize it's not that much distance, but I wanted to kind of level the playing field just a little bit and talk to you directly like I tried to talk to them. So Joan Osborne in 1995 wrote a song, or performed a song called "If God Were One of Us," popularized by Alanis Morissette as well. Joan Osborne actually didn't write the song. The song was ghostwritten for her. She wrote the song in 95. It became a really, really big hit, even bigger when Alanis Morissette covered the song. And you'll remember that Morissette's version was quite so popular that later she went on to star as God in a movie called Dogma, where she played the role of God as a kind of bumbling, clumsy person, just like you and I. Very ordinary, very plain. We have this question of who God is to each and every one of us, and I feel like songs like "What If God Were One of Us," just a stranger on a bus trying to make his way back home, this relatable idea, we're all on a journey. We're all on a journey that sometimes can feel kind of mundane. We have basic tasks to accomplish to get through our day. There's something really beautiful about the idea that God has experienced that. There's a Christian scholar by the name of Diarmaid MacCulloch. He's British. He's a Church of England scholar. And he said quite beautifully that Christianity at its best is a cult of personality. Because in addition to worshiping the God who created the universe, we also believe that God revealed God's self to us in a particular moment in time, in history, in the person of Jesus. And so Jesus takes on both godlike qualities and human qualities. And we call that, in theology, the hypostatic union. It's essentially a big fancy word that means something that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, how can someone be both fully God and fully human? It doesn't make any sense to us. So as Christians, even though we have all of these doctrines and dogmas for trying to figure out who God is, we are ultimately left wanting. And ultimately, that's when, as individuals, our imagination takes hold. We start imagining what God might look like. There's a devotional practice that you can try that involves, it's called Hitbodedut, and it essentially involves talking to God out loud as if you can see God sitting in the room across from you, just having a conversation out loud with God. The idea is to get into a private place and try to imagine the experience of God physically present in the room with you and speaking outwardly to God in that way. There's some power in trying to imagine that not only does God exist, and not only does God love me, but God looks, or appears to me at least, in a way that connects with who I am as a person. God reaches me directly where I am. This is a problem, though. And we noticed this problem this week. We saw it play out in real time. See, because we have, and we've had for a couple decades now, really, this ongoing question politically of our immigration crisis. We've needed, at least to hear a lot of politicians talking about this issue, we've needed immigration reform for some time. Now, and I think I can do this without getting political or taking sides at all, so we're going to see if it can be done. But the reality is, I think most experts in immigration agree that legally something needs to change in terms of how easy it is for people to get into the country, in terms of how easy it is as legal citizens for them to be naturalized, to provide greater opportunities for those folks who are naturalized as citizens to plug into jobs and connect to the wider country and really feel like this nation, as we say in the song, this land is your land, this land is my land, this idea that this country can mean different things to us and belong to both of us. It's kind of a beautiful thing. But we've needed some kind of reform, and so the latest in the long line of discussions about immigration reform was the news this week that families that were undocumented who crossed the border were going to be separated as a kind of no-tolerance way of communicating, hey, listen, we really don't want you crossing the border illegally. Word got even worse when we realized that many of these children were being locked in what some called cages, what others called detainment centers. It really doesn't matter what you call it. It's something that separates children from their parents, very young kids from parents. And in many cases, these children don't speak our language, so they have no way of communicating unless some translator, who these kids in many cases don't know, is brought in to kind of facilitate and give directions and help comfort the child and that kind of thing. Now, I remember my first day of first grade. I didn't go to kindergarten and I didn't go to preschool. My first day of real school was first grade. And so I remember being separated from my parents, and it was traumatic. And I was in elementary school, and it was the first grade. So if that was traumatic in that sense, not really traumatic, but just this feeling of, oh, there go my parents, and I'm still here, what's going on? I imagine for many of these kids who don't speak the language, who are very young and don't understand the culture, regardless of politics, it's got to be a little scary. Even just a little, right? Or a lot scary, right? But here's what I noticed, and this is how it connects to this idea of how we talk about or think about God. I noticed on both sides of this issue, I realize when you say both sides, immediately that's loaded. That's become a political term too, both sides. But on both sides of this issue, I saw folks arguing not so much with what was actually going on with these detainment centers. I found folks in some way, using social media like Twitter or Facebook, or even just one-on-one conversation, kind of passive-aggressively taking pot shots at the other political side, rather than simply acknowledging that this situation is really bad and that it's negligent and that we need to fix it and that someone is responsible and we need to figure out who is responsible and prevent this from ever happening again, instead of simply making that the focus became about how this is proof that the other side has been out to get us the whole time. The left argued this in relationship to the right, and then the right argued back at the left that similar things had happened under the previous administration, which was a little more favorable to the left. And so you're just being a big hypocrite if you call us out on it because, well, that's just how it works, right? This is politics. Your hands are going to get dirty. And so if you're picking sides now, it's because you're a hypocrite. That's how the story goes. And then on the other side, and I saw this, unfortunately, in the UCC, the church that I love, I saw ministers, ordained clergy, colleagues in the UCC who are called to serve all people, posting and sharing messages, not just with their congregations, but with the whole world, that anyone on the other side of this issue, or anyone who identifies with a certain group, so in this case we're talking the GOP, anyone who is a member of the GOP is at fault. The GOP is responsible for this. That was the rhetoric. The reality was, though, and if you actually look at conservative reporting in the day, there were so many conservative voices saying this is wrong and it must be stopped. How might we benefit from those voices? This is wrong and it must be stopped. How might we elevate those voices instead of using it, particularly when there are so many, and that people of different political persuasions, right and left, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, wherever you are, everyone seemed to say, okay, let's take a step back and figure out how we got here and figure out what we need to do. And yet I still saw folks using it as an opportunity to say, hey, let's look and see how this all got started. We gotta find someone to blame. Not someone specific, not specific choices. No, we have to group everyone in together, put them in a detainment center in our mind, essentially, and separate them from everybody else because they are the bad guys and we are the good guys, and that's it. I saw a tweet that was posted that said, if someone says to you that the Obama administration did these things, keep asking them if they're comfortable with children in cages. It's a clever point, but it's this idea, it's this assumption that if you're on the other side, you must automatically be in favor of something that so many people seem to have an issue with. I take issue with this idea that we reduce where people fall on the political spectrum into us versus them categories, particularly when we see everyone, or a lot of people on both sides, saying, this is not okay. And I don't think it's right, I don't think it's good enough to simply say, well, this is a crisis, so we're allowed a little leeway. We're allowed to act out of turn. I think that can be true sometimes. Sometimes you just don't know how to respond. And the first image you see of a kid in a cage, I mean, it does something to you. Right? It's a powerful image. It hurts you inside. And so naturally, and I felt this way all week, I wanted to say something about all of these different things. Every picture I saw, every headline I saw made me angry. And I realized that 9 times out of 10, if I wanted to post or say something, it was because I was angry and not because I actually had a solution. I mean, if you ask me about politics and you ask me about policy, I could probably come up with something that I think would work. I'm sure that's probably true of most of the people in this room. We all have ideas about, if we just do this, it would probably fix our political system, or at least make it a little better. So yeah, I have opinions, but they're just that. They're just opinions. And when I'm acting only out of anger, and when I only see us versus them, in other words, when I make Jesus my poster boy, what I love about this scripture is that the disciples were shocked by who Jesus was. They'd spent time with him. They'd seen him do miraculous things before, but this particular miracle changes everything. Master, don't you care that we perish? Who is this that even the wind and the seas obey him? God was bigger than they thought. And so I'm torn, to be honest with you, because on the one hand, I'm thrilled that our church and other churches, other denominations, not just the UCC, are speaking out against things that we believe. We're speaking our truth. We're speaking out against things that we believe are wrong. But at the same time, how we do it matters. Like Anne Lamott says, if God hates all the same people you hate, it's time to re-examine your image of God. So I'm sorry. Frankly, I'm sorry. If you are a member of the UCC and you've been hearing rhetoric that suggests that the UCC is Christianity for Democrats, I love this, right? Responding to the living God with a progressive voice and working hands. But when we say progressive, what we mean is a progressive faith. We don't necessarily mean you have to vote a certain way to be a member of this congregation. And when we say, whoever you are, wherever you are on life's journey, which, by the way, is not something we invented. It's something the UCC has been saying for a long time. If we mean that, then our progressive Christianity can't simply be Christianity for people who are registered to vote in only one way. Faith can't just mean towing the Democratic Party line. It can't just mean repeating what you've heard as long as it's socially acceptable. The Obama administration murdered civilians with drones. This is a thing that happened. By their own count, at least 117 civilians were murdered with drones by the Obama administration's own count. This is devastating news, and it can happen on the left and it can happen on the right. So to my friends on the right, and I don't know who you are, I know this is a diverse congregation, but I don't know who you are. To my friends on the right who simply wanted to point out this week that hypocrisy abounds, and you were shut down, and you were judged, and you were called a bigot, I'm sorry. You were right. You were right. We have not, at times, spoken out enough. And at other times, we have equated being a person of faith with being a Democrat. We have equated what it means to be a member of the UCC with how you vote, and that's it. We assume that everyone is on the same page. And I know, as the pastor and as the one who talks to a lot of you one-on-one, I know none of you are on the same page. There is a lot of diversity, even within this congregation, that may not initially look very diverse, depending on where you're standing. Ideological diversity abounds in our church, and I am afraid that in our zeal and our rush to right and rectify a genuine wrong in our world, that we may have hurt others in the process. This is still ongoing, by the way. The event that I announced that the UCC is doing, this is still a thing. I'm not sure if you've seen the poster yet. It seems a little exploitive to me. We are people. We're flawed. Your church is flawed. So my invitation to you this morning is not to be a downer, although I realize, it's a summer service and there's a car wash outside. Why is it such a downer this morning? I don't want it to be a downer. My invitation to you is to a Christianity that is not about the left and is not about the right. That is not only about justice, but is also about the Spirit. I was having a conversation with a UCC colleague who lamented the fact that all he feels like he ever hears the UCC say is politically where you should stand. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if you feel the same way, but I know that there are others who feel that way, and I'm sorry when we have mistaken your spiritual development for political issues. They're connected. They're not separate. You can have all the right politics and have a shallow spirituality. You can have a deep spirituality and have all the wrong politics. How they interact is important. It's not enough to check off a box. So my invitation to you this morning, as we try to figure this out, find God where you are. Expect to be surprised by where you find God. My wife and I were having a great conversation this morning on the way to church about the folks whose politics surprise us. The folks who say and do things that stereotypes, at least, would tell us are not possible for folks who ascribe to certain politics, and yet when we meet them and encounter them, they surprise us. Let God surprise you. Don't assume Jesus is a poster boy for just your causes. And in the process, find and develop a dynamic relationship with a God who is made of flesh and blood and who came to elevate and sanctify and redeem not ideas, not political parties, but people. The cool thing is, too, is this Jesus is made out of more than poster board.